Kiss me.
You think that's gonna fix it, huh?
You didn't have to stretch. You used to stand on your toes when you did that.
Why, in your stocking feet?
I'm getting smaller, Lou, every day.
Well, that's silly, honey. People just don't get smaller.
Yeah, you're right. We'll go back to the doctor tomorrow. I'm sure he's got a pill for it.
The Incredible Shrinking Man is a film from the 1950s in a sort of sci-fi fantasy genre that Universal was making a series of films at the time. And Jack Arnold was the director. His work was always very interesting because he took this genre and elevated it a bit, meaning that there were a lot of low-budget sci-fi movies being made, often by Roger Corman as a way to sort of capitalize on its popularity. But Jack always raised the bar.
The first Jack Arnold film I saw was It Came from Outer Space, and I loved space movies as a kid. Of course, I saw most of them on television because I was a little too young when that film first came out. But I was a big fan of anything with aliens or flying saucers. I was in that era where science fiction was working its way into popular culture in so many ways. I collected comic books, similar subjects. And of course, I saw most of these films by Jack Arnold as they were creature features on the local television station.
Jack Arnold's films had a little extra, a little bit more of a philosophy or a point of view that is worth considering. For example, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, at the center of it, there's a question about ecology. In It Came from Outer Space, the idea as humans, why do we have to kill things? And on The Incredible Shrinking Man, maybe that there's some other form of existence beyond our contemporary world, which was explored during the ending, which was a pretty radical idea for the time.
I first saw The Incredible Shrinking Man probably in the early 1960s, and it stood out from the other films they had been showing in a way I didn't quite understand at the time. It wasn't about creatures or explosions or big action sequences. It was this sort of sad and creepy film. It had a disturbing emptiness to it, and it depressed me. I felt isolated, like the character was in the film. I didn't really understand that as a child, as a teenager, but I had an odd feeling of creepiness about the film. I was entertained by it because, of course, it would be fascinating to be, made into a miniature person and have all your toys now be your size and you could play in your household with things. That's a fascinating concept, being miniaturized. And so that part of the entertainment value of Incredible Shrinking Man was always there for me as a kid, even though I didn't understand the dilemma that Scott Carey was going through as a human being and his soul being isolated from everybody else. And that's something I can only understand now as a bigger kid.
I think all of Jack's films have a unique visual style, and I think that comes from, obviously, his ability as an artist, as a storyboard artist, to visualize in his mind's eye what he wanted to see in his movies and then to convey that to his technical people. And you see that throughout his movies. The Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Gill Man, and this amazing suit that was made and sculpted to create a character that was frightening but also sympathetic.
Universal, of course, was doing monster films and hostile visitors from another planet and so on. This film was very different. It was an isolated world in this film, pretty much takes place in a house, didn't go into space, it didn't have any big epic action sequences. It reminded me of some of the science fiction short stories I was reading, because they often, if you were reading stories by Ray Bradbury or Richard Matheson, they had this psychological aspect to the story. Incredible Shrinking Man is a precursor to the style of Twilight Zone, I think. And I'm a big fan of, and who isn't, of classic Twilight Zone. And so many of them fall into this same realm as The Incredible Shrinking Man, which is a personal story about one individual who runs into some trouble and they have to get out of it. And like The Incredible Shrinking Man, they often don't get out of their dilemma.
I had discovered a water supply and even a dwelling place. now, the search for food.
Most films in the 50s, the monster movies, the science fiction movies, ended in a big sequence where whatever threat, the attack by aliens or something, was abated by the army or by cold germs or something, depending on which story it was. They came to a conclusion. You could walk out of the theater saying, I'm glad we got out of that one and we saved the world. But The Incredible Shrinking Man doesn't have an ending like that. It's not sewn up with an ending which tells you that everything's okay.
The ending of the film is really quite beautiful. The idea that there is this other existence beyond our contemporary world, that there is no zero, is a beautiful philosophical concept that is very sophisticated for that type of movie of its time.
The first half, of course, you introduce the dilemma for Scott Carey. And the second half of the film is really a survival movie. He's dropped into this dangerous world, which is just a normal household, where a pin can become a spear, and the cat becomes King Kong. The spider, of course, they're creepy for people even when they're normal size. So here you have a huge one. So all those factors work into his struggle to survive. I always enjoyed the scene. Well, is enjoy the right word? I don't know. Fascinated by him almost going down the drain in the cellar. And we had a drain like that in our own cellar, and I can kind of imagine the swirling water and me going down into the darkness. And I could relate to that threat that would occur if you were very small.
The visual effects in the movie are, of course, key to the storytelling. We have to establish that the character is able to shrink in size, and that's essentially the idea of the film. How do you portray that and make that look realistic?
Hello.
If that is a little bit too awkward or too phony, it potentially hurts the storytelling. It was a very challenging thing to do in the state of the art of visual effects for 1950s. But I think they did a great job.
Has he come out yet?
Especially because Jack Arnold, as the director and storyteller, took a hand in those sequences and storyboarded them. You can tell that Jack is thinking about all these shots. It's part of his creative storytelling process, and it's extremely well integrated into the plot of the movie. There's a beautiful set of storyboards that have been protected that are at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences that Jack drew. And again, that's unusual for the director to be so involved in the designing of a visual effects sequence. Those sequences work really, really well and are superior to other action sequences of films from its time. So I greatly admire what he did in those scenes. There were examples of miniature people in other movies. Dr. Cyclops comes to mind. So it's not unique to the movie, but I think what is unique about it is that it's such a focal point of the story. And then the challenges, I admire the challenges that it took. They basically had various techniques to achieve this.
Scott, I've canceled our phone.
One, of course, is the idea of mixed scale, which means that you would build a full-size set, and then you would build an oversized set, which is an exact copy of it, but larger, and then find a way to put the two together. On the right-hand side of the frame, Scott is in a set with oversized props. On the left side, it's a normal scale. And the tricky part is finding the way to make the transition between the two so they look seamless. In this case, they used the edge of a curtain, ran the transition line down around the table and through the floor so that you barely can notice it. It's a really great illusion and very effective.
No, I'll let the doctors worry. I'm 2 days behind on my book.
There's always very little information about who specifically did creative work in the studio films of that era. It's a dilemma for someone like myself who wants to find out who did things and where the ideas come from, because credits in movies were usually just given to a department head. For Incredible Shrinking Man, it's very likely that Jack Foley did many of the sound effects in the film. Now, you may recognize that word Foley because there's a whole process of recording sound effects in post-production for a movie, and we refer to it now as the Foley process. A process where once the film has been shot, you would take individual scenes, project them in a quiet sound stage onto a screen, and you would perform footsteps, handling of props, specific sounds that could be customized to the actual timing of the actions on screen. And so it's very possible that Jack actually did the work. His daughter says that he spoke of it, but we don't have any official document that's, puts him on the payroll of that movie. But those kind of things are very hard to find. They just don't exist. So if it is Jack Foley, then that's a very interesting point, because he is known in sound history for developing a process that's commonly used today.
Well, Clifford Stein worked in the Universal optical department and had a long career doing visual effects movies. This must have been one of his toughest assignments because, again, they had to coax out the compositing process on the optical printer to get the best they could out of it. So if you have an actor running on stage that's painted black, and by contrast, he's white with white clothing, or basically much brighter than the stage floor, the difference between those two you can extract, meaning that photochemically you can make a mask by reverse printing that makes density inside the white area, which would be reserved for the actor, and then you make the reverse of that, which is like a stencil, which then shows transparency in the center, but density in the surround. And by having that stencil piece, A and B, you can then composite the actor from one scene and place him on another scene, in this case, running across his living room floor. The problem, of course, is that this type of photochemical matting wasn't very sophisticated in the sense that it couldn't quite keep the edge characteristics of what you would expect to see with somebody running, meaning that the edge is slightly blurred. So in many of the scenes, you sort of see a sharp, stenciled cutout feel. Again, quick cuts, beautifully edited together to make it work, but that was one of the limitations that they struggled with. Another problem with this technique, of course, is that since the actor is running across the floor and you're using the black of the floor to extract him, the shadow goes away because the cast shadow is black on that black floor. So you've lost the shadow. And those shots do suffer a bit because as the cat is running towards Scott, the cat has a nice cast shadow, but he doesn't. Now, we're kind of critically looking at the different aspects that went into making this movie, but for audiences in the 1950s, this would all be very dramatic sequences that would be working extremely well for the storytelling of the movie.
For Incredible Shrinking Man, there were a number of interesting things with the sound. First of all, there's not that many sound effects in the film. They're very sparse. At that time, they probably didn't have the budget to spend the time on all of that, and it just wasn't the style. On the other hand, the result of the somewhat sparse soundtrack is a creepiness, kind of a disturbing emptiness to this otherwise familiar world of a common household. They do a nice job with certain specific things. He's got the needle, and that was probably more like dropping a crowbar on the ground, so it sounded like it had weight. There's a very nice little sequence where Scott Carey goes up and plucks on the spider's web to try to annoy it, and it's a great sort of metallic twanging sound.
Come on down! Come on, you devil, I'm waiting for you! Come on!
I would imagine it was done either of two ways. It might have possibly been a screen door spring stretched out and plucked, but I think it was probably more like the movement of a slinky. You can take a slinky, and if you suspend it somehow in the studio, you can then tap on it, pluck on it, and play with it, and you can get an effect very much like twanging that spider web. And I have such a device. I've used it for, you may recognize it, for laser guns. And I think that's how they did it. I think they did it with a wire or a slinky-like device.
What's interesting is that it's important not to only have one technique. Like they did some optical compositing, they did oversized sets with mixed scale, oversized props.
Hello.
There's also a scene where they used rear projection.
Mind if I sit down?
No, please do.
And of course, the table and chairs are oversized so that they look small, and then the rear projection behind them is of a normal-sized set. They did lots of things so that every technique is not the same every time. Mixing it up sort of gives you just that feeling of not being able to study it too much or not sort of get the gag. The idea that Scott is clinging to a pencil as a way to save his life as the water is going down the drain. There's an interesting photograph that sort of shows the crew filming that sequence so that you really get a sense of what the physicalities of the set were that they had to photograph.
I realized there was just this one chance, and I had no choice. I had to take it.
Another fun sequence is when Scott is going across a cavern on a paint stick that has dried and become like a teeter-totter or a diving board almost, because as it starts to weaken because of his weight, there's a very effective scene where you're cutting back and forth from a regular paint stick and then an oversized, scaled environment that he can interact with and grab onto. That's a beautiful sequence, very well done. And again, there's a great still that sort of shows the practicality of how they shot that. He really isn't 100 feet in the air. He's only a few feet off the stage floor, so he's never in any real danger. But through the photographic process and the editing, it looks like a very dramatic sequence. What you have to sort of do is create effects that look credible, even though they are full size, because physics, we can't really shrink anything, right? We can't make a small effect. The effect has to be real scale, real size. And as you look at these things, they're not exactly what a match looks like, but again, they had to create something that you could tangibly photograph physically in front of the camera. Well, apparently it was decided that this should be sort of a secret, how the effects were done. There wasn't a lot of publicity sort of showing how things were done. In fact, there's only very few stills that kind of reveal the process, which we've found and are sharing with you. But for the most part, it was kept a secret, and I think that was correct. They wanted to sort of not reveal the gag. They didn't want people to really be thinking about the process of how the illusion was created. They just wanted the audience to watch the movie. So it's interesting to see that the publicity department at Universal created a series of stills that sort of suggested that the character, Scott, actually was a shrunken person. And so he would arrive at the set and he would show his ID to the guard at the gate. Or there would be sort of additional stills of him sitting around on the oversized props as sort of a way to create this illusion of publicity that he really was a miniature person. The film is really filled with great ideas. So there's this cut where suddenly he's inside his living room, and then you realize he's in a dollhouse. And that's the reveal, which is sort of, again, a really smart idea. And then ultimately, when the cat attacks him in the dollhouse, he turns around, the scratch through the window, all that works really great. So there's this beautiful shot of the cat sort of coming in through the back that is really effective. Just this sort of like surrealist imagery and impactful ideas as part of that sequence. But it's interesting is that for the sequence with the cat, which is one of the most effective sequences in the film, we would do it exactly the opposite today in the way that the director, Jack Arnold, did it. What they had to do is photograph the cat first and trick the cat into a good performance, making room for the actor to, let's say, be running in front of it and to get all the timings correct. Because the cat's gonna do what the cat's gonna do. You just have to trick it into getting the shot that you want. So it would be shooting many takes to get something that finally worked, and then the actor would have to let the cat lead the scene and react to what the cat is doing, right? Like, okay, I have to be over at this point, at this moment, because the cat's gonna turn its head and look at me, and then I have to leave frame. So that's all like mimicking whatever the cat did. So today we would have a CGI cat, which would be, a computer-generated cat. So the actor would do the scene with the director, and then the CGI cat would follow what the director did. So it would be exactly the opposite today.
Grant Williams must have been one of the first actors to be trapped in a world where all the scenes are him alone. I mean, it might be more common nowadays because we have many movies where people are in a green screen room for hours at a time looking at things that aren't really there. But probably Incredible Shrinking Man is the first of such type of productions where an actor has to pull off a reality without that reality being around him, because you couldn't see the giant cat or the spider. He goes through a whole sequence where he has to climb up to the spider web, find a way with the hooks and things. It's very inventive. Having household items as your main props, that's fascinating unto itself. When the spider attacks Scott Carey, it's interesting. It has a roar. It actually has a snarl and a roar. In a way, that's ridiculous, of course. A spider doesn't have lungs to produce sound, But it's a movie tradition because it delivers the message, this is a killer beast, and it's gigantic, and you're going to be devoured. And also, if you listen carefully, there are nice footsteps done for the spider as it runs around. It grounds it in a reality, and that's just one of the things you're not supposed to really notice. But subconsciously you notice it, and it puts that spider and Scott Carey together in the same scene.
And then, of course, he ultimately has to stab the spider, and it bleeds on him. It's really, really kind of shocking, that sequence. It must have produced a big effect among audiences of that time. Jack Arnold had done Tarantula, which is actually a very scary movie. It's nicely done in that the spider is always sort of a dark silhouette, menacing shape kind of coming into frame. But it is kind of humorous to note that the spider that is in the basement for The Incredible Shrinking Man is also a tarantula. So they probably figured, well, we know how to do this. I believe that I had heard that they tried using a Black Widow originally, which would have been more appropriate. But I think the Black Widow ended up sort of being too small and too difficult to work with. And since they had the experience of working with tarantulas, Scott has a tarantula in his basement.
One very clever use of sound is the treatment of Grant Williams' voice as the character as he gets smaller and smaller.
Scott, people know, they realize they're not laughing at you.
They're not?
No.
Why not? It's funny, isn't it?
They change the quality of his voice to make him sound smaller as well.
Scott, there's so much to hope for. Any day now, the doctors say they may find the antitoxin.
Sure. Lou, let's get out of this place before we both go crazy.
And it provides a great contrast when he's in a scene with Randy Stewart and they're talking back and forth, and her voice is normal, the way you'd hear it in a room, in the living room, and his voice is tinier and tinier and tinier.
Scott, are you in there?
Did you have to make such a racket? I told you what happens in there.
In post-production, they take the recording of his voice and begin to remove, through a filter, the low frequencies of the voice. And they start taking away progressively. And as you do that, the voice seems to get thinner and tinier. And consequently, in your mind, he's smaller.
Louise! The cellar! Look in the cellar!
You can do it on my own voice, actually. If I talk like this and I'm just normal, and if you slowly take away the low frequencies, I begin to sound smaller. And so am I shrinking? And smaller. I'm tinier now, right? Until my voice becomes a tiny little thin, tinny, tiny. Goodbye. I'm shrinking away.
Well, thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you talking about The Incredible Shrinking Man. But it is my cat's feeding time, and I do have to get out of here before he finds me. So thank you very much.